When I heard those words whispered in my ear at the airport, my entire world shattered. But let me start from the moment everything changed. The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport felt cold against my skin that Thursday night. I watched Marcus pull his carry-on toward the security checkpoint, his navy suit crisp and perfect as always. He turned back one last time, flashing that smile that had won me over 9 years ago. Our 7-year-old son Dylan stood beside me, his small hand gripping mine with unusual intensity. Marcus walked back for one final hug. He smelled of expensive cologne and confidence. "I'll miss you both," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "This Chicago deal is huge for us, Nicole. When I get back, everything's going to be different. Better." He crouched down to Dylan's level, placing both hands on our son's shoulders. "Take care of your mom, buddy. Dad will be back in 3 days." Dylan didn't smile. He just nodded once, his gray eyes fixed on his father's face, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Marcus kissed his forehead and stood, giving me one last embrace. "Love you both. I'll text when I land." Then he was gone, disappearing through the security line with efficient, purposeful strides. Just another business trip. Just another few days apart. That's what I thought. Anyway, we turned toward the parking garage, Dylan's hand still clutching mine. The crowd thinned as we moved away from the terminals. My son had been quiet all evening, which wasn't unusual. Dylan had always been an observer, a listener, the kind of child who noticed things others missed. But what happened next would save our lives. As we approached the elevator to the parking level, Dylan suddenly stopped walking. His grip on my hand tightened painfully. I looked down at him, concerned. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "Dylan? Sweetie, what's wrong?" He pulled me closer, rising on his tiptoes. His breath was warm against my ear as he whispered words that made my blood run cold. "Mom, don't go home tonight. Please. I heard Dad on the phone this morning. He was talking about us, about making sure we were asleep. Something about after he's on the plane." His voice sounded scary. "Please, Mom. Please believe me this time." My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled back to look at his face. Dylan wasn't the kind of child who made things up for attention. He was serious, methodical, almost unnervingly perceptive for his age. 3 weeks ago, he'd told me he saw a strange man watching our house from a parked car. I dismissed it as imagination. 2 weeks ago, he'd said he didn't like Marcus's new business partner, that the man's smile was wrong. I'd told him to be polite. Just yesterday he'd mentioned hearing his father pacing in his office late at night, talking angrily on the phone. Each time, I'd explained it away. But now, standing in this airport with my son's terrified eyes locked on mine, every dismissed warning crashed back into my consciousness. "What exactly did you hear, Dylan?" I got up early for water. Dad's office door was open a crack. He was on the phone. He said, "Make sure they're both asleep. The timing has to be perfect. I'll be in the air, completely clear." Then he saw me and shut the door really fast. "But Mom," his voice, it wasn't normal. It was cold. My throat constricted. Marcus had been my husband for 9 years. The father of my child. Successful commercial real estate developer. Community volunteer. The man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning. But my son was shaking. And in that moment, some primal maternal instinct overrode every logical objection my brain was generating. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, sweetheart. We won't go home. Not yet." Relief flooded Dylan's face. He threw his arms around my waist. And I felt his small body trembling. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for believing me." We got into our Honda SUV, on the 4th level of the parking garage. My hands shook as I started the engine. Where could we go? What was I doing? This was insane. Marcus was on a plane to Chicago. He'd text me when he landed. Everything was fine. Except my son was terrified, and something deep in my gut Some instinct I'd been taught to ignore in favor of logic and trust, was screaming danger. I drove out of the airport. But instead of taking I-70 west toward our home in the Green Valley subdivision, I turned east, then south, then doubled back, my thoughts racing. Finally, I made a decision that probably saved our lives. I drove to a quiet dead-end street about 3 blocks from our house. It was dark, lined with closed businesses, but from where I parked, I had a clear view of the entrance to our subdivision. I could see our street, though our house was hidden behind trees. "We're just going to wait here for a little while," I told Dylan, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just to make sure everything's okay." He nodded, his face solemn. He trusted me now, and that trust felt like both a gift and a terrible responsibility. We sat in the darkness. I turned off the interior lights. The clock on the dashboard read 9:47 p.m. Marcus's flight was scheduled to land in Chicago at 11:30 p.m. local time, 10:30 p.m. our time. Nothing should happen until then, if anything was going to happen at all. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Boarding now. Miss you already. Kiss Dylan for me. Love you both." I stared at the message. The same loving words he sent on every trip. My chest ached with confusion and fear. Was I going crazy? Was I traumatizing my son by sitting in a dark car based on overhead fragments of a phone call? Dylan sat quietly in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the direction of our house. He didn't complain, didn't ask questions, just waited with a patience that seemed far too mature for 7 years old. At 10:03 p.m., headlights appeared at the entrance to our subdivision. My heart stopped. A dark van. No company logos. Windows tinted black. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. I grabbed Dylan's shoulder, pulled him down low. "Don't move, baby. Stay down." The van turned onto our street. Through the sparse trees, I watched it slow to a crawl, then stop, directly in front of our house, 240 Maple Creek Drive. "Mom," Dylan whispered, "that's our house." "I know." "Shh." 2 men got out. Even from this distance, about 300 feet away, I could see they wore dark clothing, baseball caps pulled low. They moved with purpose, not the hesitant body language of someone lost or confused. One of them reached the front gate of our yard. I expected them to jump the fence, to break in like burglars. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, something small and metallic that caught the streetlight. A key. My hands started shaking violently. I watched, frozen in horror, as the man inserted the key into our gate lock. It opened smoothly. They walked through our front yard like they belonged there, like they'd been invited. At our front door, the same routine. Another key. The door opened without force, without hesitation. "They have keys," I whispered, more to myself than Dylan. "They have our keys." My mind raced. We only had 2 sets, mine and Marcus's. The spare was hidden in the garage in a locked box. No one else had access. Marcus had given them our keys. The men disappeared inside our house. No lights turned on, just the occasional sweep of flashlight beams through the windows. They were looking for something. Or preparing something. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "Just took off. Will text when I land. Sleep well, my loves." The words made my stomach heave. Sleep well. While men with his keys were in our house. Dylan's hand found mine in the darkness. "You were right to wait, Mom." 15 minutes passed. The longest 15 minutes of my life. I kept expecting them to leave, but the flashlight beams continued their methodical sweep through our home. Moving from room to room. Our bedroom. Dylan's room. The kitchen. The living room. Then I smelled it. Even from where we sat, with all the car windows closed, the acrid chemical odor reached us. Gasoline. "Mom, what's that smell?" Before I could answer, I saw one of the men appear at Dylan's bedroom window on the 2nd floor. He was doing something, moving quickly. Then he disappeared. 30 seconds later, both men emerged from our front door. They moved fast now, no longer cautious. They jumped into the van and pulled away without turning on their headlights, until they reached the main road. For a moment, nothing happened. Our house sat there in the darkness, looking perfectly normal, looking like home. Then I saw the flicker. Orange, small at first, in the living room window. Then Dylan's bedroom window. Growing, spreading. The flicker became a glow. The glow became flame. Our house was on fire. Oh God, I gasped. Oh my God. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Within 2 minutes, flames were visible in multiple windows. The chemical smell intensified. This wasn't an accidental fire. They'd doused our home in accelerant. If we'd been inside, asleep in our beds like we should have been, we would have died. Dylan and I would have burned alive while Marcus sat on a plane with a perfect alibi. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen through tears. I didn't remember starting to cry. Marcus. Landed safely. Hope you're both sleeping soundly. Love you. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. I shoved the car door open and vomited onto the pavement. My whole body shook, heaved. The dinner I'd eaten hours ago came up burning and bitter. I retched until there was nothing left but bile and horror. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had seen the fire, called 911. I could see neighbors emerging from their houses, staring at the growing inferno that used to be our home. I should go there. I should talk to the firefighters, the police. I should tell them we're alive. But if I did that, what would happen? Marcus would know we'd escaped. Marcus, who had planned this meticulously, who had hired professionals, who had a perfect alibi and probably a perfect story. I pulled myself back into the car, wiping my mouth with a shaking hand. Dylan was crying silently in the back seat, watching his childhood home burn. We can't go back there, I told him. Not yet. No one can know we're alive. Do you understand? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Where do we go, Mom? I thought of friends, but they were Marcus's friends too. Family, but my parents were dead. My only sibling lived overseas. Marcus's parents would never believe their golden boy capable of this. Then I remembered. At my father's funeral 4 years ago, when I'd been lost in grief, an older woman had approached me, elegant, severe, with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes. Margaret Hayes, attorney at law. Your father was one of my dearest friends, she'd said. He asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to him. She'd handed me a business card with a handwritten note on the back. If you ever need help and can't trust anyone else, call her. Day or night. She knows everything. I'd kept the card in my wallet, puzzled by the cryptic message. My father had been a successful man, but not wealthy. What secrets could he possibly have that required a lawyer's protection? I pulled out my wallet with trembling hands and found the card, worn and creased, but still readable. Margaret Hayes, attorney at law, an address in downtown Denver. It was almost 11 p.m. The address was for an office, not a residence. But the note said day or night. I started the car and drove away from the burning house, from the gathering crowd, from the life I thought I knew. Margaret Hayes's office was in an old 2-story building in a quiet commercial district. Most of the neighboring businesses were dark. I pulled up to the curb, my hope fading. How could this possibly work? But I got out anyway, lifting a sleepy Dylan into my arms. He was too big to carry comfortably anymore. But I needed to hold him, needed to feel his heartbeat, his warmth, the proof that he was alive. The street was empty. I tried the main door to the building. Locked. Of course it was locked. What was I thinking? I pulled out my phone, the battery showing 15%. I dialed the number on the card, expecting voicemail or nothing at all. It rang twice. Then a woman's voice, alert despite the late hour. Margaret Hayes. I'm sorry to call so late. My name is Nicole. Nicole Parker. My father was Thomas Richardson. He said if I ever needed help. Where are you right now? Her voice was sharp, focused. outside your office building. I didn't know where else. Stay there. 2 minutes. She hung up. I stood on the dark street, holding my son, watching the shadows. Every car that passed made my heart race. What if the men in the van had seen us? What if they were coming back? Exactly 2 minutes later, a light came on inside the building. A door I hadn't noticed, set back in a narrow alley beside the main entrance, opened. Margaret Hayes stood there, wearing a long cardigan over pajamas, her gray hair in a braid. At 60-something years old, she looked completely awake and utterly calm. "Come in. Quickly." We followed her through the door into a small apartment behind the office. It was neat, spare, filled with books and legal files. She locked 3 separate deadbolts behind us. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a worn sofa. "I'll make tea." I sat, Dylan curled against my side. My body was shaking so hard I could barely hold the cup of hot chamomile. She pressed into my hands. Minutes later, she made hot chocolate for Dylan, who took it with whispered thanks. Margaret sat across from us in a straight-backed chair, her eyes never leaving my face. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." So I did. Marcus's business trip, Dylan's warning, the wait in the darkness, the van, the keys, the gasoline, the fire, Marcus's texts, timed perfectly with each stage of his trip, his landing message, so casual, so loving, while our home burned. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. When I finished, silence filled the room. Dylan had fallen asleep against my shoulder, exhausted by fear and adrenaline crash. Finally, Margaret spoke. "I've been waiting for this call for 4 years. I hoped it would never come. But your father knew. He knew Marcus was dangerous." "What? That's impossible. Dad introduced us. He gave Marcus his blessing when we got engaged. Your father was a brilliant man, Nicole, and very, very rich." I shook my head. Dad was comfortable, but not rich. He left me the house, a small education fund for Dylan. That's what he wanted everyone to believe, including Marcus. Margaret stood and went to a locked cabinet. She returned with a thick file folder. "Your father didn't trust easily. When Marcus came into your life, Thomas hired investigators. What they found worried him." She opened the file. Inside were photographs, financial records, reports. Marcus at underground poker games. Marcus meeting with loan sharks. Marcus's business failing, drowning in debt. Your father discovered that Marcus's real estate company was a house of cards. Fake investments, embezzled client funds, massive gambling debts. But he couldn't tell you directly. You were so in love, and Marcus was careful to hide his true nature. So Thomas did something else. Margaret pulled out another document. He created 2 wills. One was public, the one Marcus knows about. It left you the house and the education fund. But there was a second will, sealed and held in trust. My hands shook as she handed me the paper. I read through legal language that made my head spin, until I reached the crucial section. My father hadn't been comfortable. He'd been extraordinarily wealthy. Multiple properties across Colorado, a substantial stock portfolio, gold reserves, an art collection worth millions, all of it hidden in complex trusts and offshore accounts. The inheritance would transfer to me, under 2 conditions, when I turned 40 years old, or upon the death of both primary and secondary beneficiaries, meaning me and Dylan. Marcus figured out the second will existed, Margaret continued. I don't know how. Maybe he found documents, maybe he pressured someone. But 3 months ago, my surveillance team reported that he'd been researching inheritance law, asking questions about death certificates and estate transfers. Surveillance team? Your father left funds specifically for your protection. I've been watching Marcus. His gambling debts have ballooned to over $3 million. His company is about to collapse. He embezzled from his biggest client, the loan sharks, but it only bought him time. He's desperate, Nicole. Cornered. And cornered men do terrible things. I thought I might be sick again. So he planned to kill us. Both of us. For money. Not just the money, the insurance too. You have a $2 million policy on yourself, and $1 million on Dylan. With the inheritance, Marcus would have cleared all his debts, and had enough left over to disappear somewhere warm. Start over with a new identity. The fire was supposed to look like an accident. A perfect accident. Gas leak. Tragic. He's at a conference in Chicago with hundreds of witnesses. Devastated husband and father. He would have gotten everything. Dylan stirred against me, and I instinctively tightened my arms around him. This child, my beautiful boy, had saved our lives with a whispered warning. There's more, Margaret said grimly. In that same surveillance we discovered something else. 3 weeks ago. Dylan told you about a man watching your house. He did. I thought he was imagining it. He wasn't. That was one of Marcus's hired men casing the property. And 2 weeks ago, when Dylan said Marcus's new business partner made him uncomfortable, that partner was actually a connection to the arsonists. Every warning I'd dismissed. Every time I'd told my son he was mistaken. Guilt crashed over me. He's been trying to tell you, Margaret said softly. Children sense things we've trained ourselves to ignore. Your father knew that. He told me, if anything happens to me, watch Nicole's child. Children see the truth. I looked down at Dylan's sleeping face. 7 years old. Just a little boy, but he'd seen through his father's mask when I'd been blind. What do we do now? I asked. If I go to the police, it's my word against his. He has an alibi. He has a story. Everyone will think I'm crazy. Traumatized, maybe even that I set the fire myself. We need proof, Margaret said. Proof that can't be explained away. And I think I know where to find it. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that had probably won countless cases. Marcus didn't do this alone. He hired professionals. Those men had keys, knew exactly where to go, moved like they'd been trained. That costs money and requires planning. Somewhere there's a paper trail. Communications. Evidence. But where? Margaret smiled, a cold expression that made me grateful. She was on my side. We start with the house, or what's left of it. The next morning, Margaret drove us to the site of what had been our home. Fire trucks were still there, though the flames were out. Our house was a charred skeleton, walls collapsed, roof caved in. Everything I'd built with Marcus, every memory, every piece of Dylan's childhood, reduced to ash and twisted metal. Police and fire investigators swarmed the property. Margaret walked up to the lead officer with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Good morning, officer. I'm Margaret Hayes, attorney for the Richardson estate. This property was held in trust by Thomas Richardson and passed to his daughter Nicole Parker. Given the circumstances, I need to secure any valuable documents or items that may have survived. The officer looked skeptical. Ma'am, this is an active investigation. We can't let anyone. I understand completely. However, there was a fireproof safe installed in the home office on the first floor. It contains legal documents and personal papers of significant value. I'm not asking to disturb the investigation, merely to retrieve that safe under your supervision. She handed him a card and a document. Here's the estate paperwork showing my authority. I can wait while you verify. The officer studied the papers, made a phone call, then nodded. All right, but you can't go in. We'll retrieve it for you. Of course. Thank you, officer. She turned to me, keeping her voice low. Your father installed that safe. Told me about it years ago. I'm betting Marcus didn't know, or if he did, he thought it only contained regular documents. 30 minutes later, 2 firefighters emerged from the ruins, carrying a medium-sized safe, blackened but intact. They set it down on the driveway, and Margaret signed for it. Do you have the combination? The officer asked. I do. Margaret knelt and began working the dial. After a moment, the safe door swung open. Inside were papers, some legal documents, Dylan's birth certificate, and something else. A small black leather-bound journal. Margaret carefully removed it, keeping her expression neutral. "Thank you, officer. This is exactly what we needed." We returned to her car. Dylan quiet in the back seat. I told him we were getting important papers from the house. He'd nodded, understanding more than a 7-year-old should have to. Back at Margaret's apartment, she opened the journal on her dining table. We both stared at Marcus's handwriting. Page after page of meticulous notes, dates, names, amounts transferred, meeting locations. Marcus had kept detailed records of everything: his gambling debts, the names of loan sharks, Vincent Russo, Tony Chen, others, his embezzlement from clients. And then, in the final pages, his plan. Phase 1. Establish alibi. Chicago conference. Multiple witnesses. Phase 2. Hire professionals. Initial payment $50,000. Final payment upon confirmation. Phase 3. Timing. Tuesday night. Both targets home. Gas leak scenario. Phase 4. Collection. Life insurance within 48 hours. Estate claim within 30 days. He'd written it all down. Every step, including the names of the arsonists and the bank account where he'd made the initial payment. He kept this as insurance, Margaret said, against the people he hired. If they tried to blackmail him or double-cross him, he could bring them down with him. It's leverage. But why keep it at home? Arrogance. He never thought you'd survive to find it. After the fire, he probably planned to retrieve it himself, claim he was gathering personal effects. The safe would survive, and he'd have his insurance policy. This is enough, isn't it? This proves everything. Margaret closed the journal carefully. It's a start, but we need more. We need something that ties Marcus directly to the act, not just the planning, something undeniable. Dylan, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." He looked nervous, picking at the edge of his shirt. "I did something Dad wouldn't like. A few weeks ago." "What did you do?" "I bought a spy camera. You know, one of those toy ones for kids? It records video and sound. I put it in Dad's office on the bookshelf. I wanted to know why he was always so angry on the phone." Margaret and I stared at him. "Dylan," I breathed, "is that camera still there?" He nodded. "It's small, black, on the third shelf behind Dad's golf trophy. Nobody would notice it." Margaret was already standing. "That camera, if it survived the fire, if it captured anything, could be the proof we need." "The office was on the first floor," I said. "It's completely destroyed. Nothing could have survived. Toy electronics are surprisingly durable. And if it was on a metal shelf, protected by the trophy." Margaret grabbed her keys. "We need to go back. Now." Getting the fire department to let us search the ruins was harder the second time, but Margaret's persistence and legal authority eventually won out. This time, we went in ourselves, wearing borrowed firefighter gear and hard hats. The office was a disaster. The desk was a charred skeleton. File cabinets had melted. But the metal bookshelf was still standing, twisted but intact. I searched the third shelf with gloved hands, moving aside the warped metal of what had been Marcus's golf trophy. And there, blackened but whole, was a small black cube, about 2 inches across. Dylan's spy camera. We rushed back to Margaret's apartment. She had a tech specialist waiting, a young woman named Sarah who worked for her firm. "Let's see what we've got," Sarah said, connecting the camera to her laptop. The screen flickered, then steadied. The camera had been recording in short segments, triggered by motion and sound. There were dozens of files. Sarah opened them one by one. Most were mundane. Marcus working at his desk, making normal business calls. Then she opened a file dated 2 weeks before the fire. Marcus was on the phone, pacing. His voice was clear, angry. "I don't care what it costs. I need it done. Both of them. Make it look like an accident. Gas leak or electrical fire. I'll be out of state. Completely clean. You get half now, half when I see the death certificates. A pause as he listened to someone on the other end. Tuesday night. I'll make sure they're both home and asleep. The house key will be in the agreed location. There's a safe in the office. Leave it alone. Everything else burns. Another pause. No witnesses. No bodies means no payment. And if you try to cross me, I've got records of everything. You go down. I go down. We all stay loyal. We all get rich. He ended the call and sat down heavily in his chair. For a moment, his face was visible on the camera. The mask of the devoted husband had slipped completely. What I saw was cold calculation. The face of a stranger who had never loved us at all. Sarah opened another file. This one was dated 3 days before the fire. Marcus was meeting with 2 men in his office. I recognized them from the night of the fire. The arsonists. Here's how it works, Marcus was saying. I'll be boarding a plane at 8:30 p.m. Flight takes 2 hours. You go in at 10 p.m. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, I'm landing in Chicago with 200 witnesses who saw me at a conference. Perfect alibi. One of the men spoke. What about the kid? If he wakes up? Marcus didn't hesitate. Do what you have to do. I don't want details, just results. The casual way he said it, the complete absence of emotion. This man had been my husband, the father of my child, and he would have murdered us both without a second thought. We had everything we needed. Margaret made one phone call. Detective Morrison, it's Margaret Hayes. I have something you need to see. It's about the Green Valley fire. Within an hour, Detective James Morrison was sitting in Margaret's apartment, watching the videos with an expression that grew darker with each passing minute. When the footage ended, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he looked at me and Dylan, his face softening with something like sympathy. Mrs. Parker, I'm glad you and your son are safe. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of attempted murder I've ever seen. Can you arrest him? I asked. Oh, we can do better than that. We can let him bury himself. Morrison's plan was elegant. Marcus thought we were dead. Let him keep thinking that. Let him go through the motions of the grieving husband. And when he made his move to collect the insurance money and claim the inheritance, we'd be waiting. 2 days after the fire, Marcus returned from Chicago. The video footage from the airport and various news cameras showed his performance. The devastated husband, stumbling off the plane, asking about his family, breaking down when told no bodies had been recovered yet. He went to the fire site, broke down on camera, gave a tearful interview to local news. They were my whole world. I just spoke to Nicole before I boarded the plane. She said Dylan was already asleep. How could this happen? He played his part perfectly. The community rallied around him. His business partners, his poker buddies. Everyone offered sympathy and support. Marcus accepted it all with the right amount of grief and shock. But Margaret's surveillance team tracked his private actions. 3 days after the fire, Marcus met with an insurance adjuster, pushing for a quick payout. He contacted Thomas's estate lawyer, trying to get information about the second will. He hired a document forger to create fake death certificates for me and Dylan. Every move was documented, every conversation recorded. Then came the final piece of Margaret's trap. She arranged for Kevin Park, one of Marcus's gambling associates, who owed money to the same loan sharks, to approach Marcus with an offer. Your wife hired me a couple weeks before the fire, Kevin said during their meeting at a coffee shop. She seemed paranoid, wanted to secure something valuable. She gave me this key necklace, told me to hold on to it. I need cash, man. I'll sell it to you for 10 grand. He showed Marcus a key, the kind that opens a safe deposit box. Marcus's eyes lit up with greed. Where did she keep this? Some bank downtown. She mentioned her father's stuff being there. Look, I don't know what's in the box, but she seemed to think it was important. 10 grand and it's yours. Marcus paid. The transaction was recorded. He spent 2 days gathering fake documents. A forged death certificate for me, A forged will giving him power of attorney over the estate. A fake lawyer's letter supporting his claim. Then he made an appointment at First National Bank with Robert Chen, the manager who had been my father's friend for 30 years. The morning of the appointment, Margaret, Detective Morrison, and I arrived at the bank first. We went in through the back entrance. 2 other detectives came with us, plainclothes officers who stationed themselves in the vault room. Robert Chen, who knew everything, greeted Marcus warmly at the front desk. "Mr. Parker, my deepest condolences. Your loss is unimaginable." Marcus played his part, eyes red as if he'd been crying. "Thank you, Robert. I'm just trying to handle Nicole's affairs. She would have wanted me to take care of everything properly." "Of course. Let's go to the vault. The safe deposit box is ready." They walked through the bank, past the tellers, past the loan officers, into the secure vault area. Robert used his key, and the fake key Marcus had bought from Kevin, to open box number 4. "I'll need to verify the documents before we proceed," Robert said. Examining Marcus's forged papers, "Everything appears to be in order. Let's see what's inside." He opened the box. Inside was a single envelope. Marcus reached for it eagerly. "Actually, Mr. Parker," Robert said quietly, "according to our records, this box requires a designated witness to be present when opened. Standard procedure for estate items. The witness is waiting in the private room." Before Marcus could object, Robert gestured to a small viewing room adjacent to the vault. "Right through here, please." Marcus hesitated. Then, confident in his fake documents and perfect alibi, he stepped through the door. Dylan and I were sitting at the table, very much alive. The color drained from Marcus's face. For a moment, he stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He looked like he was seeing ghosts. "Looking for us, Marcus?" I asked quietly. Dylan spoke up, his young voice steady and strong. "Hi, Dad." Surprised, Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the doorframe. "Nicole, you can't be." The fire. "We weren't home," I said. "Thanks to Dylan. He heard you planning. He saved us." I pulled out the black leather journal and placed it on the table. "Looking for this?" Marcus's eyes locked on the journal. His face went from shock to panic to something cold and calculating. He was thinking, trying to figure out his next move. What story might still save him? "I don't know what you think you know," he started, his voice gaining false confidence. "But I was in Chicago. I have witnesses. Whatever happened to the house, I had nothing to do with." "Stop." Detective Morrison stepped into the room from where he'd been waiting against the wall. "Marcus Parker, you're under arrest for 2 counts of attempted murder, arson, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." 2 more detectives appeared, blocking the doorway. Marcus looked around wildly. "Trap. This is insane. I didn't do anything." "Nicole, tell them. This is some kind of mistake. Margaret put you up to this. She wants your father's money." "We have your journal," Morrison said, detailing everything. The gambling debts, the loan sharks, the payment to the arsonists. Names, dates, amounts. "That's not mine. Someone planted it. This is a setup." "We also have video footage," Morrison continued calmly, "from a camera in your office, showing you hiring the arsonists, discussing the murder of your wife and child, telling them to do whatever they had to do to Dylan if he woke up." Marcus's face crumbled. His legs gave out, and he slumped against the wall. Morrison pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the detective read Marcus his rights, my husband, the father of my child, the man I had loved and trusted, began to cry. Not tears of remorse, tears of rage and defeat. "I was desperate," he choked out. "The debts, the threats, they were going to kill me. I had no choice. Vincent Russo, he said he'd hurt Dylan if I didn't pay. I was protecting us." "By murdering us?" I asked softly. He looked at me with wild eyes. "The money would have saved us. Don't you understand? With your father's inheritance, we could have started over." I could have paid everyone off. We would have been free. Except Dylan and I would be dead. I didn't want to, but there was no other way. It was almost funny in a horrible way. Even now, caught completely, he was trying to make himself the victim. The desperate husband forced into terrible choices. Morrison pulled Marcus to his feet. "Let's go, Mr. Parker." As they led him away, Marcus looked back at Dylan one last time. My son met his father's eyes with a steady gaze that held no fear. Marcus looked away first. The trial lasted 6 weeks. It would have been faster, but Marcus's expensive lawyers tried every trick they could think of. They challenged the journal's authenticity, claimed the video was somehow faked or illegally obtained, argued that Marcus was entrapped by Margaret's scheme with the fake key. None of it worked. The jury watched the videos. They read the journal entries. They heard testimony from the arsonists, who had been caught within days, and quickly agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. They heard about the gambling debts, the embezzlement, the insurance policies. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, clear as daylight. Dylan didn't have to testify. Morrison and Margaret made sure of that. But the jury knew about his warning, his bravery, the toy camera that had captured the truth. The verdict came back in less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked at Marcus with undisguised disgust. "You planned the murder of your wife and 7-year-old son for financial gain. You hired professionals. You created an elaborate alibi. You showed no remorse, no mercy, no hesitation. In 23 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such calculated evil. I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole on each count of attempted murder, to run consecutively. May you spend the rest of your days contemplating the magnitude of your sins." Marcus was led away in orange prison jumpsuit, his face blank. The mask was gone. Nothing remained but a hollow shell of the man I thought I knew. In prison, Marcus's life became the hell he'd tried to avoid. The loan sharks he'd named in his journal had connections inside. Protection was expensive, and Marcus had no money, no power, no charm to manipulate people. Word spread quickly about what he'd tried to do. Even among criminals, there are lines you don't cross. A man who tries to burn his wife and child alive for insurance money sits at the bottom of the prison hierarchy. Margaret's investigators sent regular updates. Marcus was in protective custody most of the time, but there were incidents. A broken nose in the cafeteria, scalding water thrown on him in the showers. He lived in constant fear, the way he'd wanted Dylan and me to die in fear and pain. I felt nothing when I heard these reports, no satisfaction, no pity, just a vast emptiness where my marriage and trust had once been. A year after the trial, Margaret and I finished settling my father's true estate. The inheritance was staggering. Multiple properties in Aspen, Boulder, and Denver. A stock portfolio worth millions, gold reserves, an art collection that included 2 minor Picassos and a small Monet. My father had been a quiet genius in commercial real estate, building wealth slowly and carefully over decades. He'd hidden it all to protect me from exactly the kind of person Marcus turned out to be. I sold most of the properties and liquidated assets I didn't need. The money felt tainted somehow, even though my father had earned it. Honestly, it had almost cost us our lives. So I did what felt right. I established the Thomas Richardson Foundation, named for my father. It had 2 missions, both close to my heart. First, full college scholarships for gifted children from low-income families. Kids like Dylan, smart and observant, who notice things others miss. Kids who deserve every opportunity to develop their talents. Second, a legal defense fund and safe housing for women and children escaping domestic abuse and manipulation. Free legal representation from Margaret's firm. Safe houses where they could hide and heal. Support systems to help them rebuild their lives. The foundation opened its doors in downtown Denver, 6 months after Marcus's sentencing. The building was beautiful, modern glass and steel, filled with light. My father's name in bronze letters above the entrance. At the opening ceremony, with local officials and donors gathered. I let Margaret do most of the talking. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, but at the end, they asked me to say a few words. I stood at the podium with Dylan beside me, his hand in mine. He was 8 now, taller, still quiet but smiling more often. Therapy had helped. Time had helped. Distance from the man who had tried to kill us had helped most of all. My father taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to protect the people who need protecting, I said. He taught me to pay attention to the quiet voices, the warnings that seemed too small to matter. And my son taught me that children see truths that adults have learned to ignore. This foundation is for everyone who needs someone to believe them, someone to fight for them, someone to say, "I see you and you deserve safety." The applause was warm. People approached afterward to share their own stories of domestic violence, of manipulation, of narrow escapes. Each story was a reminder of how lucky Dylan and I had been, and how many others weren't as fortunate. We moved to a new house in a quiet neighborhood, 40 minutes outside Denver. It was smaller than the house that had burned, but it was ours, built with clean money, and filled with peace. The backyard was huge, with trees for climbing, and a garden where Dylan could play. Dylan went to therapy twice a week. He had nightmares sometimes, waking up crying about fire or his father's voice. But they grew less frequent as months passed. He made friends at his new school, started playing soccer, smiled and laughed, and was slowly learning to be just a kid again. He never asked about Marcus, never asked to visit him in prison. It was as if his father had died in the fire that never claimed us. Sometimes I wondered if that was healthy, if he should talk about it more. But his therapist said Dylan was processing things in his own way, at his own pace. Some wounds heal better when you stop poking at them. On a warm Saturday afternoon in June, almost 2 years after the fire, Dylan and I sat on our back porch drinking lemonade. He was working on a school project about heroes, people who made a difference. "Mom," he asked, not looking up from his poster board, "can I write about you?" "Me? Why me, sweetheart?" "Because you believed me," he said simply. "When I told you about Dad, you didn't think I was being silly or imagining things. You trusted me even when it seemed crazy. That's what heroes do. They believe people when everyone else thinks they're wrong." My throat tightened. "Dylan, you're the hero. You saved us. You heard what Dad was planning and you warned me. Without you, we would have died." He looked up at me, his gray eyes so serious. "But I couldn't have saved us by myself. I needed you to listen. Lots of grown-ups don't listen to kids. They think we don't understand things. But you listened." I pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "I'll always listen to you. Always. I promise." "I know," he said, relaxing against me. "That's why you're my hero." We sat in comfortable silence, watching butterflies dance through the garden. Somewhere far away, Marcus was in a cell, living with his choices. But here, in this peaceful place we'd built from the ashes of our old life, Dylan and I were safe. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Foundation just approved another 15 scholarships. Thomas would be proud." I smiled and texted back. "He would be. Thank you for everything." "That's what family does," she replied. Family. Not blood family, but the family we choose. Margaret had become the grandmother Dylan never had. Robert Chen was like an uncle, always ready with advice or support. The foundation staff were aunts and cousins. Sarah, the tech expert, taught Dylan coding on weekends. We'd lost everything in that fire. Our home. Our sense of safety. The man I thought was my husband. The father Dylan thought he knew. But from those ashes we'd built something stronger. A life based on truth instead of lies. Relationships built on trust instead of manipulation. A purpose larger than ourselves. Dylan went back to his poster, carefully drawing and writing. I watched him work. This brave, perceptive child who had seen through a monster's mask and saved us both. The evening sun painted the sky orange and gold. nothing like the terrible flames that had consumed our old house. This light was warm and gentle, promising another good day tomorrow and another after that. Marcus had tried to burn us out of existence. Instead, he'd forged us into something unbreakable. And in the end, that was his greatest failure. He'd thought we were weak, easy victims, collateral damage in his desperate scheme. He'd miscalculated completely. Because I'd learned something important that night at the airport, when my son whispered his warning, and I chose to believe him. Trust isn't blind faith. Love doesn't mean ignoring warning signs. And sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important truth. Dylan finished his poster and held it up proudly. He'd drawn a picture of the two of us standing in front of our new house with the sun rising behind us. The title read, "My Mom, My Hero." Below that, in his careful printing, "She listened when it mattered most." I hugged him tight. This child who had saved our lives, who continued to save me every day by simply being himself. "I love you, Dylan, more than anything in this world." "I love you too, Mom," he said. "We're safe now, right? For real?" "For real," I promised. "Marcus can never hurt us again. Never." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to adding details to his poster. I sat back in my chair, breathing in the summer air, feeling the solid boards of our porch beneath my feet, hearing the ordinary sounds of our neighborhood. We were alive, we were free, we were safe, and that was everything.